everyone, I'm Shannon from I Read YA, and I am so excited to be here with Scott Westerfeld, the New York Times bestselling author of the Impostors series. Scott, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Really good. Nice to see you.
Awesome. Scott, do you want to tell people why we're here today?
Well, mostly it's because we have a new set of covers coming out for the Impostors series, and they're really amazing, and I think they really capture the sense of the series in a way that no covers have so far.
I completely agree. So at the end of this video, you'll have to stay tuned. We will be showing you these incredible new covers. And then you also need to stay tuned because we'll be showing you how you have a chance to win all of these incredible books with these stunning new covers. So stay tuned until the end and we'll tell you a little bit more about that. So Scott, why don't we get started? Can you tell us all just a little bit overall about the Impostors series?
Right. The Impostors series is about these two twin sisters who are living one life between the two of them. One of them's name is Rafi, and she is living the public life of the sisters. She's the sister who everyone knows about. She is the daughter of a wealthy and powerful oligarch who's a terrible human being, a bad man. And she is out there helping him rule his city. She always looks amazing. She's always dressed perfectly. She always has just the best quip. She's good at diplomacy. She is serving for him. She's the sort of the velvet glove for his chainmail fist. The other sister, in whose point of view we are, is Frey. And she was born 17 minutes later. And as a result, she has been turned into she's sort of the private sister. Nobody knows about her. She's completely secret. And her sole job in life is to serve as kind of a body double for her twin. So in any situation in which Rafi is out there, would be, among crowds of people where she might get kidnapped or assassinated, Frey takes her place. So she's an identical twin and a body double, and also a bodyguard, sort of the last line of defense. So instead of learning how to dress beautifully and do diplomacy and talk and quip at all, with the press, she has learned how to do combat and self-defense and first aid. So their lives are, on the outside, look a lot alike. And of course, they look completely the same. They have the same DNA. They're identical twins. But their internal lives and the reality of their lives are opposite.
So this series takes place in the Uglies universe. And of course, Uglies is one of my personal favorite series. I feel like my first dystopian series that I ever read. And so what can Uglies fans who are coming to the Impostors series find in this incredible story?
Well, it all takes place about 20 years after the events of the Uglies series. So Tally Youngblood is kind of a mythological character, somebody who's disappeared for a while. She's actually gone into hiding because she's tired of everyone asking her, do you think the world is better since you changed it? And because the answer to that question is sometimes yes and sometimes no, but it's not up to her. It's up to the rest of us to make the world the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about, 5 years ago when I started on the Impostors series, I was thinking about all the ways that world would have changed in the time that's elapsed since I finished that series. And it's been about that long. It's been 10, 15 years. I decided to add a little bit more time, make it 20 years, so that these characters would be teenagers who had grown up in the new world. And they're part of this new world. And, and as a result, no spoilers, but as a result of the events that happened at the end of the Uglies series, the world is going through this titanic change. There's a revolution. And one thing I've always known about books is that in the happily ever after, there's no such thing as a happily ever after. After every rom-com, there's still a marriage with fights and conflicts, and after every revolution, there's unfortunately still issues to be sorted out. There's people taking power who are not necessarily on the side of right, and so that's the world we're in. But there's still lots of hoverboard action, still lots of chases, still lots of cool future technologies that bring up philosophical questions. So it's sort of has the Uglies DNA stamped in it.
Yeah, I definitely feel that when I was reading Impostors, it still felt so much the core, like how I felt reading Uglies, but being able to see, you know, I feel like we don't often talk about like all these books that take place in these like revolutions and overthrowing, you know, governments and everything. We don't talk about what happens next. And you're right, it's not always, it most of the time is not perfect, because then you know, you just have a whole host of other new problems.
There is a sense in which the Uglies universe, the sort of meta theme of it is that the solutions to our last problems are the cause of our next problems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at the way the world, you know, the world's problems used to be that there was lots of isolated countries that didn't understand each other. So we developed these ways like airplanes and cars and telecommunications that brought the world together. And now the airplanes and cars and the internet are our problems.
Yes.
So and in the Uglies world, the solution to those problems was to give everyone the operation and to make everyone pretty minded and to make everyone treat each other the way that we treat, you know, beautiful people. And of course, those problems had to be solved during the Uglies series. And now the solution to those problems has become the next set of issues for my next set of characters to deal with.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating premise, I feel like, to start the Impostors series with. So like, was that your main motivation? Like you were just thinking about like what this world might be like after, you know, Tally's story, quote unquote, was completed? Like, was that your motivation to go back to this, or were you just missing some hoverboards? Because I know I was.
Well, yes and yes. It's definitely been fun to write hoverboard scenes again. Yeah, part of it was that I was looking at the way that like in the back of my head, the Uglies universe is still running as a simulation. So it's obviously, I've been sort of checking in on it and seeing how it's changed and wondering how it's changed. But there's another thing that happened, which is that Uglies was originally written to talk about plastic surgery. But I think that the way people interpret it now is that it's more about social media. And being pretty is not something that literally happens to you. It's something you do with a filter. It's something you do by, you know, with your Instagram fakery, where you just pretend to be happy all the time, and you sort of like give yourself a lobotomy so that you're just this happy person who lives by a swimming pool, or who just wants to take, you know, a private jet somewhere. And as a result, I thought about the ways in which our Instagram selves are different from our real selves, our normal selves. And Rafi and Frey sort of embody that. Rafi is like Instagram person. She's always beautifully dressed. She's always amazing. She's, you know, she's rich, she's famous. And Frey is her sort of real self, the doubting, defensive, secret part of ourselves that don't make it onto social media. So they sort of, as two sisters, they embody that divide that's in everybody now between our outside and our inside.
Yeah, it really lines up so closely with social media and influencer culture and all that stuff. And I think also what's fascinating is that in addition to you exploring like how Frey and Rafi are two sides of this, I feel like also Rafi in the book is having that literal, like she is perfect to the outside and seemingly perfect to Frey, but also is really struggling with like the role she has to play.
Right. And for Frey, because she was born later and Rafi got the public adulation and the love of their father. And whereas, you know, so she thinks of Rafi as someone who stole her life in a way. But at the same time, Rafi looks at Frey and says, you're the person who gets to have a private life. You're the person who gets to have an interiority and to be alone when you want to be alone, and just to work on your punching bag. Whereas I have to go out and do this party. So there's this kind of sense of where they both are jealous of each other. At the same time, they're both trying to protect each other.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, Uglies, you know, this world and the DNA of Uglies is a large part of Impostors. But if you haven't read Uglies, can you still read Impostors and still, you know, fall in love with this world without kind of this foundation?
Yeah, I mean, it takes place 20 years later. There's at least in the first book, there's none of the same characters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as though you're going to get confused in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. I think that there's, like, with a lot of things like this, there's some nice deeper layers that you get when you know Uglies. There's some things you say, but they're more like Easter eggs than they are essential plot points. I have received some fan mails from people who read Impostors first and read Uglies second, and that they were like, I'm glad I did it that way, because it seems really cool to me that I had to, it's kind of fun to read the prequel sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
There's something more interesting sometimes about like a movie that shows you the results and then shows you the causes.
That's so true. It would be fascinating to like, okay, you see where the Uglies world ends up just reading Impostors, and then you go back and see, here's how we got here.
Right.
So Uglies is coming to Netflix. How excited are you?
That is true. Oh, I'm immensely excited. There's for those of you who didn't see the big announcement, so it turns out that there's an actress named Joey King, which I'm sure many people have heard of. She's in The Kissing Booth. She was in The Act. She's in a ton of stuff actually now. She seems to be on every Netflix announcement I see.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when she was a little kid, she had terrible flu and was bedridden, and her older sister gave her a set of the Uglies books that she had just finished and said, these are great. Since you're stuck in bed for a couple weeks, you should read them. And so she did. And ever since then, she's just wanted to be Tally Youngblood, as I'm sure others who've read the Uglies books have felt. And so after The Kissing Booth blew up and became a big movie, Netflix said, so what do you want to do now? Like, now is your chance to do the thing you want to do. What is it? I guess her agent probably said that more than Netflix.
Yeah.
But, and she said, yeah, let's do Uglies. So it's something that I've always wanted for this series, which is to have somebody bring it forward who read it as a teenager and who understands it not in the way that the parents of people who read it understand it, or not in the way that a movie producer who wants to make a lot of money understands it, but as somebody to whom it meant something as a kid, as a native reader of a YA series. And I'm really glad that she's there. She has also an executive producer, as am I. So I think hopefully together we'll be able to like keep things on track and make it make sense to the people who read it when they were 13.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always so important for the people on the team of any adaptation, but I feel like especially book adaptations, because that is so much like, you as an author have put so much care into like the craft of the world, and then as readers, we care so much about like our perception of the book, that it's so great to know that like so many people on the team are going to be so heavily like involved in the process.
Yeah, and I feel like the Anonymous is the production house that originally optioned it, and they also have, they came to me as parents of readers and as people who I think really got it. And I had a long conversation with them before, or conversations with them before giving them the rights. And hopefully they've got the right idea about the series too.
Going back to Impostors a little bit, of course, we'll be binging the Netflix, like when it hits Netflix, we'll be just obsessed with everything. But we do have book 3 of the Impostors series, Mirror's Edge, coming out in April. So what can you tell us about book 3?
So Mirror's Edge most of it takes place in Shreve, which is the city where Rafi and Frey grew up. That's where the whole series started. But very soon, as in the way of all Uglies books, the two sisters found themselves traveling across the world, going to other cities, going to places in the wild, going to like lots of different places that have been transformed into, like, the interesting thing about Impostors, that world, is that the Uglies world, all the cities were kind of the same. They might be more conservative, a little bit less conservative, but they all had the operation. They all had pretty committees telling you how you were supposed to look. But after that regime fell, obviously all these cities have gone off in different directions. So we've been to a bunch of different places that seem, like Victoria and Diego in the previous chapters, and Poth, that are all completely new and have their own new twist on utopia or dystopia. But now they finally come back to Shreve. And the thing about Shreve is Rafi and Frey's father was a dictator, and he created this technology called surveillance dust. And surveillance dust basically means that, like when you're in a dark room and you shine a flashlight and you see all those little specks of dust, in Shreve, about half of those are cameras and microphones. and repeaters and little repair box. They're little nano machines, just barely big enough to see, that, that are recording everything that's happening from any angle. So the government can look at any conversation you've ever had, down to the merest gesture, every eye movement you've ever made, every sound you've ever uttered, and can play it back. So this is a world where the sort of surveillance technology wing of the Uglies universe, and it was always there, has become the most important part of the series, and this idea of constantly being watched, and of the world around us reacting to everything we say and do is a huge part of this book. So what's happening is that Frey is, that city is still under her father's control, and Frey is sneaking in with a bunch of other sort of rebel commandos to do some stuff. Mm-hmm. And of course, they're in a state of constant surveillance. They've had to get surgery to completely change themselves, to change their walks. They have to move differently. They have to code everything they say in ways that the city AI won't catch. So it's a long study in paranoia and in the ways that people have to hide themselves in a technological society. And in a society that has social media, we all have to like invent ourselves constantly for these cameras that are constantly seeing us. And I think, and it's also about the way that people react to those, like to react to surveillance, because Frey didn't really know that much about her own city. She doesn't really know how common people lived because she was rich and hidden. So when she walks around Shreve, she's seeing all these incredible reactions, all these ways that culture have responded to the fact that everyone's being watched all the time. And that was the really interesting part about exploring surveillance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just thinking about like social media and kind of like feeling like there are cameras everywhere in our own world, but it also doesn't feel like that's something that is so dystopian. It does feel like that is something that could feasibly happen in, however many years. So I think that's something that's
right.
Just fascinating about these books.
And the most amazing thing is that we're doing it to ourselves.
Yes.
We take pictures of our own breakfast. We take pictures of our own reactions to things, and we upload them willingly and freely. And it's partly interesting to explore the world in which, when you don't even have to do that anymore, how do you change the way you act when everyone can, and when you're being recorded, how does that change who you are and what you are and how you talk and how you love and who you love? Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I know that I cannot wait for everyone in the world to read Mirror's Edge. I think that it's going to just be incredible, and everyone is waiting to see what happens with Frey and Rafi. But I think we've waited long enough to share these covers. So in a moment, we're going to share these 3 incredible new covers for the Impostors series, and you'll see just why we are so obsessed with them. They're absolutely incredible. And then at the very end of the video, you'll need to stay tuned because we do have a giveaway for the physical copies of books 1 through 3. So stay tuned for that. Scott, these covers are absolutely incredible. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, I mean, people have asked me, like when they first hear the description of what Impostors is about, they say, well, how is that like Uglies? How is this story about 2 twins, one of whom is, sort of rich and famous, one of whom is a bodyguard? Like, what's the thing that makes that an Uglies book, an Uglies idea? And the main thing is that Uglies is about the difference between what's on our insides and what's on our outsides. It's about the fact that the way we look and the way that everyone immediately reacts to us and sees us and responds to us doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's going on inside our heads and in our hearts. And Frey and Rafi look the same. They look identical. And even their bodies are the same. I mean, in the sense that they have the same DNA. But who they are and the way they see the world and the way the world has treated them is completely different. So that difference between inside and outside is sort of the big meta theme of Uglies. And these illustrations are so much about showing the sort of insides of people. Like they're these amazing pictures of people where you see what's on the outside, but you also get this idea in this surreal way, in this obvious, literal, but just weird way, that there's some other completely fascinating world happening inside. It's about people being sort of split open or unraveled, or just this idea that people have an almost like a world inside them, like a circus inside them, full of strange creatures and animals and landscapes, and I just think that's that exactly captures what this series is all about.
Yeah, it is incredible. When I first saw these covers, I feel like I just stared at them for like just fully a few minutes, because there was so much detail, and it's honestly chilling to look at and to think about, like that inside versus outside aspect. And it's just, I know that it's going to be incredible for us to like finally hold these covers in our hands.
Yes, I am waiting for that. I know it's one thing to see them on the screen, but I haven't even seen them printed out in a way.
Yeah.
So, and there's something about surrealist works like this, like Salvador Dali is kind of what they remind me of. They're a little bit more controlled than Dali, but it's kind of the same thing. And what's cool about it is that it reminds you that the world is strange, that the world is always stranger than you think it is, that anytime you go to a new place or get to know a new person, it's always more complicated than you thought. Whatever they're going through, whatever they, whatever makes them act the way they do, it's always weirder and stranger and way more complicated and more unexpected than you thought. And I think that idea is perfectly encapsulated in the way these images show just the weirdness of what people are.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very end of this video, there will be a screen with all three of these covers put side by side, looking incredible. And so if the people watching take a screenshot of that part of the video and share it, tagging both I Read YA and Scott, then you'll be entered to win finished copies of all three of these books, so that you too can finally hold them in your hands, just like we will be waiting to do as soon as they're ready.
Great. So I hope everyone's having a good pandemic. Keep wearing your masks.
Yes, please.
Hope you make it through the winter when we're all going to be stuck inside. So. Yes,
I do have one final question for you, Scott.
Okay.
Is it true that you have an actual hoverboard?
I do have a physical hoverboard. Is it here? No, I'm forgetting. It's in downstairs storage unit, so I can't show you it. It was created for the first video of the first trailer that we did when the Impostors series were announced. So you can see it in that, and you can see a young actress riding it. It does not fly, unfortunately, but it is this amazing, like the props master who made it did an amazing job. And we had a really long talk about the way it should look. And if you don't mind me telling you a quick story.
Yeah.
When I first wrote these books, I imagined hoverboards, because of who I am and the technology I use, I imagine them kind of as Apple hoverboards, like sort of extruded plastic,
like
very featureless, tyrannical minimalism. But I went to a school in Indiana that had done an all-school Uglies read, and the shop classes there had made a bunch of hoverboards like the way that they saw them. And they were so much better than the ones in my imagination, because they looked like something that were important to, like objects that were important to kids, like to teenagers. They had racing stripes on them, and they had stickers of the favorite bands, and they had girlfriends' names, boyfriends' names. Like they had all the stuff that you put on your backpack that you've had. Like by the end of the year, it's got patches and it's got all this stuff that's about you and about your identity. And so, which is the opposite of, a sleek, laptop that has no stickers on it, that has nothing to show that it's different from any other. So I was talking to the prop master, and was telling her about this. And she was like, oh yes, I know how to make a hoverboard now. And so there's this hoverboard and it has all this great stuff. It has, you know, basically it's covered up with graffiti and scrawls and scribbles. And like when you draw on your sneakers because you're bored. Yeah. And when you put the stickers on that make, you know, that make sense to you and make it your object. And I just love that. So yeah, so I do own a hoverboard. It just doesn't fly.
I mean, if it flew, I would be like, all right, like, you know, you need to share that with the world. But it's still amazing to think about, yeah, like if hoverboards were a thing that like teenagers and all of us could have, like we would totally, like I would put a ton of stickers on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you got to know it's your hoverboard.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's because it's so important in both series. The hoverboards are really important because that's where your freedom comes from. Mm-hmm. That's where your escape comes from. That's where your me time comes from. And all of those books are about the relationship between the city and the wild. And, you know, in the city, it's great and your friends are there and stuff, but the wild is also this place where you go and you kind of find yourself. And that permeability and that ability to leave and to flee and to escape and to have chases and to go found your own civilization, like all of that is sort of embodied in this one piece of technology. So I think that is where your identity kind of gets found.
Honestly, I feel like the hoverboards are a beautiful metaphor for everything in these books and in our own world. So I think that is honestly a perfect place for us to end things here. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been incredible.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, well, stay tuned so that you can take a screenshot of the next slide, and then we will all be having our hands on these incredible covers soon enough. Hey readers, thanks for tuning in. To learn more about the Impostors series and to catch a glimpse of Scott's real-life hoverboard, visit impostorseries.com. And be sure to screenshot this slide and tag @IReadYA and @Scott_Westerfeld for a chance to win all 3 new Impostors books.